Do not let him drink that, Honoria Hartwell said, closing her fingers around the cordial glass before Dr. Easton could guide it across the round table to the Duke's mouth. Kelmscott Manor had sent for her to sit beside a dying man, not to contradict the physician who had already promised them a burial by morning. But Tristan, Duke of Kelmscott, was still breathing, pale and half-collapsed in the carved chair by the fire, and Francis Easton's face turned white before the medicine ever touched the Duke's tongue. The sick-room parlor pressed close around her. Melted beeswax thickened the air, and lavender had been laid so heavily it seemed meant to smother the smell of dying. Heavy curtains shut out the Cornish rain. On the polished table stood amber bottles, a silver spoon, and the dark glass of cordial that now trembled between Honoria's hand and the physician's. Honoria wore a plain blue gown and a white fichu pinned at her throat. Her black walnut sickroom case rested at her feet, like the only honest object in the room. Across from her, Lady Penelope Pelham, the Duke's cousin, pressed gloved fingers to her mouth. Behind the Duke's chair, the old steward leaned forward in alarm. Two maids watched from near the door, too frightened to breathe loudly. Honoria did not look at them. She looked at the faint gray sediment clinging to the bottom of the glass. She had smelled it the moment she entered the parlor. Bitter, metallic, wrong. Easton's hand hovered in the air, his fashionable sleeve rigid. "Have you gone mad, Mrs. Hartwell?" he hissed, lowering his voice as though a quiet insult could make it less poisonous. "Release the restorative at once." Honoria did not snatch the glass away. She merely held it. Her knuckles whitened around the stem. She was known in Cornwall as a widow who sat beside deathbeds after gentlemen doctors had finished their confident work. They sent for her when hope had already been folded away with the clean linen. She was supposed to be a shadow in the corner. But a shadow did not take a prescribed draught from a physician's hand. "It is not a restorative," Honoria said. Her voice was low, measured, and entirely without the apology a woman of her station was expected to offer a man of his. "It is heavy with antimony. If he drinks this now, with his pulse so weak, his heart may stop before the hour is done." Penelope gave a strangled gasp. Easton's face flushed a mottled, ugly red. "You ignorant, superstitious woman," he spat, stepping closer. "You dare question my measurements? You who bring the shroud to every house you enter." The insult was meant to break her. Honoria had heard worse from grieving sons and frightened widowers who wanted a woman to blame because blaming God felt too dangerous. She tightened her grip on the glass and let her inner voice go cold. Let him shout. A shouting man is a frightened man. If Easton was so certain of his mixture, why was his hand trembling? Why did he look more terrified of the untouched cordial than of the Duke's failing breath? She was not here to save him, society would say. She was here to take the blame. Before Easton could pry open her fingers, a sound stopped them all. It was not a command. It was the dry, raw scrape of a man dragging breath into ruined lungs. Tristan, Duke of Kelmscott, opened his eyes. He was 34, though illness had carved years into his face. Fever had hollowed his cheeks and left his skin gray against the dark velvet of his dressing gown. Easton had insisted he be propped at the table for the cordial, claiming it would help him swallow. Now the Duke sat with one hand slack against the carved arm of the chair, his head turned toward the woman holding the glass. Honoria braced herself for aristocratic fury. A dying Duke would surely demand his medicine. He would order her out into the rain. He would choose the physician, the family, name, the smooth male voice that came with Latin labels and polished boots. She raised her chin anyway. Tristan's hand trembled, lifting barely an inch. "Let it be," he whispered. Easton spun toward him.
Your Grace, she is hysterical. The woman has no license, no university training. She is interfering with your care. I said Tristan breathed. The effort costing him dearly. Let it be Easton. The room went still, save for the crackle of the hearth. Tristan did not look at Easton. He kept his gaze on Honoria. There was no cold arrogance in his face, no imperious demand, only exhaustion, pain, and beneath both, a strange, steady warmth that did not match the fear around him. You noticed the sediment, he said. It was not a question. Honoria's breath caught. She had expected to be called a witch. She had not expected to be observed. I noticed the smell first, Your Grace, she said. Bitter, like burnt copper. Tristan gave the smallest nod. His hand fell back to the chair. I tasted it yesterday, he murmured. It burned. Penelope began to cry. Tristan, no! You cannot listen to her. She is a death nurse. Dr. Easton is the finest physician in the county. Easton drew himself up, wounded pride sitting badly over panic. Your Grace, I will not be insulted in this manner. If you refuse my treatment, I cannot answer for the morning. Honoria watched the Duke's face. This is where he yields, she thought. Great houses always chose reputation over instinct. He would apologize to Easton. He would send her away. By dawn, if he died, they would say she had unsettled him at the end. But Tristan merely turned his head against the chair back. His breathing was already a fraction easier, with the glass out of Easton's reach. You are dismissed for the night, Easton, he said. There was no malice in the words, which somehow made them worse. I will see you tomorrow, if I am still here. Easton's jaw tightened. He shot Honoria a look of pure venom. It was not the look of an insulted professional. It was the look of a man who had been interrupted. He bowed stiffly and marched from the room, Penelope following him with frightened protests. When the heavy oak door shut, only the steward and 2 maids remained by the wall. Honoria stood alone beside the table, still holding the glass. Tristan looked at the cordial, then at the black walnut case near her feet. They told me you were a grim woman, Mrs. Hartwell, he rasped. A ghost of a smile touched his cracked lips. Honoria did not smile back. She set the poisoned cordial down beyond his reach and opened her case. The silver latches snapped in the quiet room. Inside lay her mother's folded fever charts, a cracked ivory dosing spoon, packets of clean powdered charcoal, and rolls of boiled linen. Her tools. Her proof that care could be exact. Grimness is required, Your Grace, she said when men insist on dying out of politeness to their physicians. The maids drew in their breath. Honoria waited for the reprimand. Tristan made a short sound that might have become a laugh had it not turned into a cough. The cough tore through him. Honoria moved at once. She did not call for help. She poured fresh water from a covered pitcher into a clean ceramic cup, slipped one arm behind his shoulders, and lifted him with practiced strength. He drank because she told him to drink. When he finished, she lowered him carefully back. He did not look away in shame at needing her hands. He looked up at her with that same unsettling warmth. I apologize, he said quietly, for my cousin's words. No one should be spoken to like that under my roof. Honoria's hands paused on the edge of his blanket. Aristocrats did not apologize to hired widows. They certainly did not do it while struggling for air. He is delirious, she told herself. Or he is performing kindness because he thinks he may soon meet his maker. Your Grace should save your breath for healing, not manners, she replied, her tone a polished blade. Dying men often sound generous because they do not expect to answer for it later.
The steward looked scandalized. One maid crossed herself. Tristan did not frown. He looked at Honoria as if she had placed a difficult instrument in his hands, and he intended to learn it.
Then I suppose, he whispered, his eyelids heavy, I shall have to live, Mrs. Hartwell, just to prove you wrong. He drifted into a fevered sleep. Honoria stood by his chair with the cracked ivory spoon tight in her hand. The air in the parlor felt different now. He had not punished her sharpness. He had not demanded comfort. He had listened. She turned to the mantelpiece, where Easton's sealed bottles stood in a neat, respectable row. They looked like weapons pretending to be remedies. Honoria did not trust the Duke's warmth. Warmth could be faked. Gratitude could vanish with daylight. But she trusted her own eyes. "Help me move His Grace to the settee," she told the steward. Within minutes, Tristan lay propped against embroidered pillows near the fire, his breathing shallow but no longer strangled. Penelope's abandoned chair stood empty. Easton's cordial remained on the table like an accusation. Honoria crossed to the writing desk in the corner. If Francis Easton was poisoning the Duke of Kelmscott, he would not do it without leaving a trail. Men like Easton trusted paper because paper rarely contradicted them. The night stretched long and dark. Honoria sat by the fire, writing down every symptom, every dose refused, every change in Tristan's pulse. Her script was small and precise. Around 2 a.m, the Duke stirred. "Water," he mumbled. She was there instantly. As she supported him, his fever broke slightly, leaving him shivering. She pulled the heavy wool blankets higher. "You are writing," he noted, his voice stronger, though still rough. His gaze moved to the desk. "I am recording your pulse and intake, Your Grace. It is my practice." She expected him to wave it away as female fussing. Doctors hated her notes. Families feared them. Notes made grief less convenient. "Good," Tristan said. "Read the leather book in the top drawer. The estate ledger." Honoria frowned. "I am a nurse, Your Grace, not a clerk." "Read it," he insisted, gently, coughing into his fist. "Look at the parish alms, the apothecary bills." She hesitated, then crossed to the desk and pulled open the drawer. The heavy ledger was filled with Tristan's own handwriting. She turned to the current month. Coal for Widow Higgins, wool for the orphanage, bread money for 3 fever cottages. Then she saw the entry listed beneath the Duke's charitable seal. Easton's restorative cordial, 3 crates sent to St. Piran. Fever cottages. The blood drained from Honoria's face. She turned back to the settee. Tristan was watching her reading, the horror in her posture. "He is giving it to the poor," she whispered. The danger shifted in the room. It was no longer one dying nobleman and one suspicious glass. It was the parish. It was thin blankets, empty stomachs, mothers with coughing children, old men who would take whatever a gentleman doctor put into their hands. Tristan closed his eyes. "Easton said it would brace them against the winter ague." "It will kill them," Honoria said. "If the mixture is the same, it will take those with empty stomachs first." The Duke's jaw clenched. The warmth in his face sharpened into pain. Not pride, not offended rank, fear for his people. The distance between them was stark. She was a disgraced widow who had learned to enter houses through side doors. He was the lord of the land. Yet in that candlelit room, with the ledger open between them, they were the only 2 people who knew a truth large enough to bury the parish. Honoria closed the ledger. "Will you help me, Mrs. Hartwell?" Tristan asked. Not as a master to a servant, as a man to a professional.
I will chart your fever, your grace, she answered, guarding herself against the pull of his trust. I cannot chart a county. She would not let herself hope that he truly saw her. Hope was a luxury widows could not afford. Over the next 3 days, an odd rhythm settled over the sick room. Tristan was a terrible patient. He refused to lie flat. By the second afternoon, though pale and easily winded, he insisted on having the steward bring tenant petitions to the door. Honoria listened from her chair by the fire as the Duke, voice raw, ordered rent forgiven for a collapsed roof and extra grain sent to a farm with 4 fevered children. He was endlessly patient with everyone else, but when his own breath began to rattle, Honoria rose, walked to the door, took the petitions from the steward's hands, and shut it in the man's face. "You are a tyrant, Mrs. Hartwell," Tristan wheezed, leaning back against the pillows as she confiscated a letter from the magistrate. "And you, your grace, are a fool if you think speaking until you bleed will fix a broken fence." She poured clean willow bark tea into a cup. Then she took her cracked ivory spoon and held it over the candle flame for a few seconds before dipping it into the tea. Tristan watched her. When she brought the spoon to his mouth, he did not drink at once. "You warm it," he said softly, "so the cold metal does not shock the teeth." Honoria looked away. Heat rose under her skin, ridiculous and unwelcome. "It is practical. A patient who flinches spills the dose. No one else does it." The words were quiet. They struck harder than praise. Honoria had spent years making herself useful in ways no one noticed. A blanket tucked before a chill became violent. A candle moved before smoke worsened to cough. A spoon warmed so a dying woman did not spend her last strength flinching. No one noticed. Tristan had. "Where did you learn this?" he asked. His playful edge faded into something more dangerous because it was sincere. "This kind of care." Honoria pulled the spoon back slightly. Her old armor rose at once. "From my mother. She ran a fever ward in London before male committees decided women's hands were fit for washing sheets but not for judgment. I learned from women no physician thanked." She waited for the polite dismissal, the faint smile that would say women's remedies were touching but not serious. Tristan did not smile. He looked at the cracked spoon, then at her steady hands. "Then the physicians were arrogant," he said, "and they were wrong." He leaned forward and took the dose from her hand. Honoria stepped back, her chest tight. He had not pitied her. He had believed her. A dangerous warmth was gathering in the room, quiet as embers beneath ash. That night, the quiet broke. Honoria had dozed in the armchair when a dull thud woke her. She shot upright. The settee was empty. She found Tristan by the washstand, gripping the mahogany post with white-knuckled hands. He was trying to put on his boots. His face was grey slick with cold sweat, his breathing a harsh, tearing sound. "Your Grace!" Honoria hurried forward, hands hovering, afraid that touching him too fast would send him down. "What are you doing?" "I must go down," he gasped. His eyes were wild, unfocused. "The steward said the Thomas boy has the fever in his lungs. I must go." He took one step. His knee buckled. Honoria caught him. His weight drove her back, but she braced her boots against the floorboards and held fast. He was burning again, a relapse, rising through the poison's weakness. "You are going nowhere," she ordered. Her voice lost every thread of polite restraint. She wrapped one arm around his waist and hauled his arm over her shoulder. "You cannot even stand." "I have to." Tristan gritted out, fighting her grip. The gracious Duke was gone. In his place was a man frantic with old terror. "If I stay in this bed, if I let them nurse me, it will happen again. I cannot be the patient. I cannot. Honoria dragged him back toward the settee, her muscles straining. Stop fighting me! You are not helping anyone by collapsing on the floor. He fell hard against the pillows, gasping, his hands fisted in the linen. For the first time, the man everyone called generous and steady looked shattered by the very care he gave so freely to others. When I was 10, Tristan whispered, staring at the ceiling. The fever came. My mother trusted the doctor from London. He gave her tonics. He told me not to worry. He told me to go play in the garden. His voice broke on the last word. Honoria went still. She died while I was outside, he said. Half the village died that winter because no one challenged him. I promised myself I would never sit by while another polished fool decided who lived and who did not. I built the relief fund. I pay for the cottages. I keep the physician on retainer. I sign the alms myself. He turned his head toward her. His eyes were stripped bare. If I lie here while they suffer, I am abandoning them. Honoria stood over him. She saw it then. Tristan was not warm because life had left him untouched. He was warm because he had made warmth into penance. He had tried to hold the entire parish in his 2 hands, because once, as a helpless boy, he had been sent into a garden, while death entered his mother's room. She did not stroke his hair. She did not offer sweet, useless comfort. She leaned down, her face close to his, her voice fierce and steady. You cannot save a parish by dying obediently for a doctor. Refusing care does not make you strong. It makes you absent. The hand that keeps others alive is still allowed to tremble. Tristan. It was the first time she had used his given name. He stared at her. The panic slowly drained from his eyes, leaving a deep, shaking clarity. His fists loosened in the sheets. You are a very harsh nurse, Mrs. Hartwell, he whispered. I am a living one, she replied. Her armor slid back into place, but not quite as tightly as before. Now drink your water and sleep. He obeyed. By morning, the trust between them had become visible, and visibility was dangerous. Dawn brought cold gray light and frantic knocking at the servant's door. Honoria opened it to find the housekeeper holding Emmeline Wadham, the young maid who usually brought the coal. Emmeline was doubled over, crying, out her hands cramped into claws, her face slick with an unnatural, glassy sweat. She took Dr. Easton's tonic last night, the housekeeper whispered, for her cough. Now she cannot stand. Honoria's blood ran cold. Easton's medicine was moving through the estate. Bring her in here, Honoria ordered. The housekeeper glanced toward the Duke's settee, horrified at the thought of bringing a maid into his Grace's private parlor. Honoria's voice hardened. Now! She cleared the smaller sofa and laid Emmeline down. Tristan woke at the commotion and pushed himself up on one elbow. Even from across the room, Honoria saw recognition strike him. The cramped hands, the sweating skin, the gray pallor. His own symptoms, written on a servant girl's body. Honoria worked quickly. She mixed powdered charcoal with water and forced it slowly past Emmeline's chattering teeth. She used clean cloths, fresh water, careful measures. She worked with brutal efficiency, but her hands shook when the girl retched and clung to her sleeve. Tristan saw the trembling. He saw her fight not to look at him. They will say it was me, Honoria whispered when Emmeline at last fell into an exhausted doze. The room went silent. Honoria turned slowly to face him. The armor she had worn for 3 years, the sharp tongue, the lifted chin, the refusal to soften, looked suddenly too heavy for one woman to carry.
Your Grace, she said, and her voice cracked before she could stop it. You have sat beside every sickbed in Cornwall except your own. Tristan flinched as though the words had touched an open wound. Honoria stepped closer, gripping the edge of her walnut case. Do you know why they call me the Death Widow? She asked. I did not kill those patients. 3 times male physicians arrived too late. 3 times they gave the wrong draft. And 3 times, when the patient died, they pointed to the woman who had stayed to hold the hand. They called it my bad luck, my curse. She swallowed. Her eyes burned, but she did not cry. If this girl dies, if the parish takes that cordial tomorrow at the St. Piran Relief Assembly,
Easton will point at me again. He will say I altered your medicine and hers. Society will believe him because he is a gentleman, and I am the shadow they hired after hope was gone. Tristan did not offer pity. Pity would have broken her. He looked at her as if the whole room had narrowed to the truth of what she needed. What do you require, Honoria? He asked. Not, what should we do? Not, let me handle it. What did she require? The question nearly undid her. She drew a long breath. The sharpness returned to her spine, but this time it was not defensive. It was purposeful. I require the rest of Easton's bottles from the dispensary. I require the dosing lists. I require the estate ledger. And I require one public room where he cannot whisper over me. Before Tristan could answer, the door swung open. Francis Easton stood in the threshold, with Lady Penelope at his side. His eyes darted from the Duke sitting upright to Honoria to the maid recovering on the sofa. His face twisted into righteous fury. What is the meaning of this? A servant in his Grace's chamber. He turned sharply to Penelope. Lady Penelope, I warned you. This woman is unhinged. She is mixing her own drafts. Look at the girl. She has poisoned the maid just as she has been poisoning the Duke, so she may make herself indispensable. Penelope panicked. The scandal, the inheritance, the threat of murder under Kelmscott's roof. It was too much for a woman raised to fear gossip more than sin. Mrs. Hartwell, leave this house at once, she cried. Take her case. Someone take it from her. Easton stepped toward the black walnut box. If he took the case, he took her tools, her notes, her proof, her voice. Tristan moved before Honoria could speak. Touch that case, Easton, he said, no longer whispering, and you will answer to me before every magistrate in Cornwall. He did not stand. He knew his legs would fail him, but sitting on the edge of the settee, pale and shaking, he still filled the room with the authority of Kelmscott. Easton stopped. Your Grace, you are not in your right mind, he stammered. She is manipulating. Tomorrow is the St. Piran Relief Assembly, Tristan cut in. It will be held in the old hall. Every tenant who received your restorative will be invited. Every local magistrate will be present. So will the apothecary accounts and Mrs. Hartwell's charts. Tristan, no, Penelope whispered. The scandal. Tristan did not look at her. His eyes stayed on Easton. No medicine will be distributed under my roof unless Mrs. Hartwell is permitted to speak before the parish. If you are certain of your science, Doctor, you will have no objection to defending it in daylight. Easton's face paled. Then he sneered. Let the witch speak. The county will laugh her out of the hall. He swept from the room, pulling Penelope with him. Silence fell. Honoria stared at the closed door. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She nearly stepped back. If she spoke tomorrow and failed, she would not simply ruin herself. She would drag the beloved Duke of Kelmscott into the mud beside her. The old instinct to flee whispered through her bones. Go before dawn. Take your case. Leave them to their own gentlemen. Tristan did not order her to stay. He did not promise to save her. He simply sat there, breathing through pain, waiting for her choice. Honoria looked at her walnut case. She touched the silver latch worn smooth by her mother's fingers and then her own. She thought of Emmeline's cramped hands. She thought of the mothers in the fever cottages lining up for a gentleman's poison because it bore a duke's seal. She turned back to Tristan, chin high. Then I will need a larger table tomorrow. Later, when the house had settled into that strange silence before a storm, Honoria packed the walnut case by candlelight. Charcoal, linen, notes, the cracked ivory spoon. Her hand paused over the spoon. If she failed tomorrow, the county would not merely call her wrong, they would call her murderer. They would remember Easton's title, his polished boots, his Latin, and they would forget every cramped hand she had held through the night. Worse than that, some weak, treacherous part of her thought she might lose the one man who had looked at her work and seen care instead of curse. The thought frightened her more than the assembly. She shut the case too sharply. Tristan opened his eyes from the settee. You are afraid. Honoria lifted her chin. I am sensible. That too. She looked toward him. His face was pale in the candlelight, but his gaze was clear, steady, and far too kind. I fear wanting one person in that hall to believe me too much, she said before she could stop herself. The confession landed between them, small and dangerous. Tristan did not reach for her. He did not turn the moment into a promise he had no right to give. Then I will not be your courage tomorrow, he said quietly, nor your shield. Honoria's throat tightened. Good, she replied. Shields tend to stand in front of things. I will be your witness. She held his gaze. A witness did not save. A witness did not own. A witness told the room what he had seen, and let the truth belong where it belonged. Honoria's fingers softened on the case handle. Then rest, Your Grace, she said. Witnesses should remain conscious. A smile touched his mouth, weary and warm. Yes, Mrs. Hartwell. She turned away before the warmth could undo her. The next afternoon, the old hall of Kelmscott Manor filled with murmuring voices. Tenants in rough wool stood shoulder to shoulder with local gentry in silk and velvet. The high, vaulted ceiling carried every whisper. This was meant to be a winter relief assembly, but everyone knew it had become something else. Not a formal trial, not yet, but a public reckoning, and that could ruin a woman faster than any court. At the far end of the hall stood a long oak table. Upon it sat a single glass of dark medicine. Honoria waited in the archway with her walnut case in both hands. For one breath, she let herself feel the full weight of the room. The gentry would not forgive her for embarrassing a physician. The tenants might not forgive her if she failed to prove the danger. Easton would not forgive her at all. Tristan sat in a high-backed chair near the table, pale but dressed. His gaze found hers across the hall. He did not beckon. He did not rescue. He waited. Honoria stepped into the light. Her plain blue gown looked almost severe against the finery around her. She heard the whispers start, then falter as she walked straight to the table. She did not hide behind Tristan. She did not look to him for permission. She set down her case. Snap. Snap. The silver latches opened. The hall hushed. Honoria laid out the cracked ivory dosing spoon. her mother's fever charts, the notes she had written hour by hour beside Tristan's bed. Then she placed Easton's sealed bottles beside them, one after another, until the table looked less like a charity station and more like an indictment. Francis Easton stood near the table, flanked by two local doctors. He looked polished and confident, though Honoria noticed the tightness near his mouth. "My lords, ladies, and good people of St. Piran," Easton began, "we are gathered for winter relief. Yet His Grace's judgment has been clouded by a woman who seeks to replace lawful medicine with dangerous kitchen remedies." Honoria let him finish. Then she picked up the glass. "Dr. Easton," she said, her voice clear enough to reach the back of the hall, "you claim this restorative cures the winter ague. What are its ingredients?" Easton laughed softly. "I do not explain the finer points of materia medica to women who cannot read Latin, Mrs. Hartwell." "Then I will explain the danger in English." A ripple moved through the room. Honoria held the glass so the candlelight caught the sediment. "It contains wine, camphor, and an antimonial preparation, in a dose no weakened patient should receive repeatedly. Given to a strong man, it may purge him cruelly. Given to a fevered body or a hungry child, it can bring cramps, glassy sweats, collapse of the pulse, and death." The tenants murmured. The gentry stiffened. "Lies," Easton snapped. "She is guessing. Women's guessing." "Guessing," Honoria said, "is what men call knowledge when it comes from a woman's hands." A few women in the back looked up sharply. Honoria turned toward the side door. "Emmeline Wadham, come forward." The young maid stepped into the light, supported by the housekeeper. She was still pale. Her hands trembled, but she stood. Honoria did not soften her voice. Softness would make them pity the girl instead of believe her. "Emmeline took 1 dose of your restorative for a cough. I ask the magistrates present to observe her pallor, her tremor, and the cramping of her hands." Honoria lifted her ledger. "I charted the Duke of Kelmscott's symptoms for 4 days. They are the same. The difference is that His Grace was given the cordial for nearly 2 weeks, and Emmeline for 1 night." Easton's composure cracked. "She poisoned the girl to frame me. She withheld His Grace's lawful treatment, and now this county is expected to bow before a woman who wipes death from sheets and calls it medicine." A few gentlemen shifted. The insult was ugly enough to make even its allies uncomfortable. Easton turned toward Tristan, desperation sharpening his voice. "Your Grace, will you truly set aside a physician who dined with your father, studied among gentlemen, and has served every respectable house in this county, because a hired death widow with a cracked spoon says she smelled copper?" The hall stilled. There it was. Not science. Not proof. Class dressed as certainty. Honoria felt the old wound open clean and cold. She did not look at Tristan. She looked at Easton. "I withheld nothing but death." She placed the ledger on the table. The sound rang through the hall. "You overdosed the Duke to keep him weak and dependent. And you sent 3 crates of the same poison to the fever cottages, under His Grace's seal, where the poor would die quietly, and prove the necessity of your expensive visits." The hall erupted. Tenants shouted. Gentlemen surged forward. One magistrate demanded the apothecary bills. Easton stepped back, eyes flashing toward the doors, but the Duke's footmen had already closed them. Still, Honoria felt the room waver. She was a widow. He was a gentleman. She had facts, but facts in a woman's mouth were often treated as insolence, until a man repeated them. Tristan gripped the arms of his chair. Honoria saw him gather himself to stand, and for 1 fierce second fear pierced her. If he spoke too soon, they would remember him, and forget her. The proof would become the Duke's judgment, not hers. She lifted one hand. Not much, only enough. Tristan saw it. He stayed seated. Honoria turned back to the magistrates. "Ask Dr. Easton to drink it," she said. The hall fell silent. Easton's face blanched. Honoria held the cordial toward him. "1 spoon. In public. If it is merely a restorative, doctor, 1 spoon should do no harm to a healthy gentleman." Easton did not move. A sound rose from the tenants. Not applause. Something colder. Recognition. One of the local doctors stepped back from Easton's side. The magistrate nearest the table took the bottle, held it to the light, and frowned at the sediment. "Dr. Easton," he said slowly, "you will remain here until these accounts are examined." Easton spun toward Tristan. "Your Grace, surely you will not permit this farce." Only then did Tristan rise. He gripped the armrest, unsteady but tall. The hall quieted at once. He did not draw attention away from Honoria's proof. He stood beside it. "Mrs. Hartwell speaks the truth," he said. His voice was raspy, but it carried. "I was dying in my own parlor, not from fever alone, but from pride. I trusted a gentleman's reputation over the evidence of my own failing body. I refused care because I mistook needing help for weakness." He looked across the hall at Honoria. "I was wrong." The words moved through the room with more force than any command. "My pride nearly allowed a poisoner to use my charity against my people." Tristan turned to the magistrates. "Francis Easton is to be held for examination on charges of attempted murder and fraud. Every bottle bearing his name is to be collected before sunset." Easton lunged toward the table. Not for Honoria, for the ledger. Tristan stepped forward, but Honoria was closer. She snatched the ledger back and slammed her palm flat over the open page. The page buckled under her hand. The old ink stain on her thumb left a dark crescent in the margin beside Tristan's neat handwriting. Easton stopped with his fingers still hanging above the book, as if the force of a widow's palm had struck him harder than any nobleman's command. "No," she said. One word. The footman seized Easton before he could touch the book. Honoria did not flinch. She did not step behind the Duke. She stood with one hand on the ledger and the other on the walnut case that held her mother's charts. Tristan looked at her, and in that look was a public acknowledgement deeper than rescue. He gestured to the table, to the charts, to the cracked spoon, and to the woman who had refused to be a shadow. "Honoria Hartwell saved my life," he declared. "More than that, she saved this parish from my blindness. From this day forward, she holds full authority over the Kelmscott Relief Room. No physician, steward, cousin, or patron will overrule her judgment under my roof." The applause began at the back. It came first from the tenants, then from the women, then, reluctantly, from gentlemen who understood which way the room had turned. It rolled forward like a wave and drowned out Easton's protests as the footman took him away. Honoria looked at Tristan. He was pale, exhausted, and smiling. She did not lower her eyes. She smiled back. 6 weeks later, the worst of winter had broken, leaving the Cornish coast green and wind-scoured. Kelmscott Manor's old laundry room had been scrubbed, lime-washed, and transformed. It was now the parish relief room, funded by Tristan, supplied by the estate, but governed by Honoria's rules. Sunlight streamed across clean oak tables. Bottles stood boiled and labelled. Linen strips dried near the hearth. The air smelled of vinegar, charcoal, hot water, and work. The black walnut sickroom case sat open in the center of the room, no longer a symbol of death, but an instrument of disciplined care. Emmeline Wadham stood beside it, her color fully returned. She folded linen with grave precision, while Honoria charted a new patient's symptoms. "You must press the spoon level," Honoria instructed, handing the girl the cracked ivory dosing spoon. "Never guess. Measurement is our defense." Emmeline nodded, holding the spoon as if it was silver plate.
"She will be unbearable within a month," the housekeeper muttered fondly from the shelves. "She will be accurate within a month," Honoria replied. "Unbearable may take longer." The housekeeper smiled into the linen. A shadow paused at the doorway. Lady Penelope Pelham stood on the threshold, with a basket of clean glass bottles looped over one arm. Her gloves were still on. Her bonnet was too fine for the old laundry room. She looked as though she had crossed half the estate, only to discover that repentance had no proper chair. The room quieted. Penelope's gaze moved from the lime-washed walls to the drying linen, then to the maids, who watched her with the guarded stillness of people accustomed to being ordered out of sight. "I have brought bottles," Penelope said. Her voice came out too high. No one moved. Penelope stepped inside. The vinegar smell seemed to unsettle her more than any accusation. She looked left, then right, then placed the basket on the wrong table, directly beside the clean instruments. Emmeline made a small sound of alarm. One bottle tipped, rolled, and struck another with a sharp clink. Penelope caught it, badly, her gloved fingers slipping on the glass. Color rushed into her face. "I beg your pardon," she said quickly. "I did not—" Honoria crossed the room and lifted the bottle from her hand. "The boiled bottles go on the left table," she said. "Unwashed glass never comes near the instruments." Penelope looked at her. The apology struggled visibly against years of rank and pride. "I was cruel to you," Penelope said at last. The words came stiffly, as if dragged over gravel. "And foolish. I was frightened of scandal, and I made fear sound like judgment." The room held its breath. Honoria could have sharpened the apology until it bled. She could have repeated every word Penelope had thrown at her death nurse shadow witch. The old anger still existed. It always would. But Emmeline was watching. So were the women in the doorway, waiting for medicine that would not harm them. Honoria inclined her head once. "Then take off your gloves, Lady Penelope. Glass slips when handled as if it might offend you." For one stunned second, Penelope stared. Then she removed her gloves. The door opened again, wider this time. Tristan stepped into the light. He had recovered his color. His stride was steady, yet the frantic need to carry every grief in Cornwall had softened. He paused just inside the room, as if he had learned that entering a place of care required permission too. Honoria wiped her hands on a cloth. "Your Grace, Mrs. Hartwell." He came to the table and placed a folded parchment beside the walnut case. "The magistrate has committed Easton for the spring assizes," he said. "The apothecary has surrendered his accounts, and the first endowment for this room has been accepted by my banker in Truro." Honoria unfolded the parchment. The gift had been made in the name of Tristan's mother. Beneath it, in clear legal script, stood Honoria's authority over the Kelmscott Relief Room. Not under a male physician, not subject to Easton's colleagues. Hers. Her throat tightened. "Your mother's name," she said softly. Tristan looked toward the window, where pale spring light caught the bottles on the shelves. She trusted the wrong man because no one gave her another choice. "I would like other mothers to have one." Honoria looked down at the parchment again. For years her name had followed death from house to house. "Hartwell," they whispered, as if grief could be summoned by syllables. Now her name stood on a document that would keep a door open. "Thank you, Tristan," she said. He reached across the table, carefully passing the open walnut case and the cracked ivory spoon before his hand covered hers.
He did not pull her into an embrace. He did not make a spectacle of feeling in a room full of women and linen and work. His hand was no longer fever-hot, but it still carried the faint roughness of convalescence, the warmth of a man who had learned to be held steady. Against her own fingers, ink-stained and work-worn, his touch felt neither possessive nor fragile. It felt present. "Cornwall owes you my life, Honoria," he said. "But I owe you something deeper." She looked up. For the first time, being seen did not feel like exposure. "And what is that?" His thumb brushed over her knuckles near the ink stain she had stopped trying to hide. "The courage to be cared for." Honoria turned her hand beneath his and held on. On the table between them lay the cracked ivory spoon, worn smooth by women who had measured care before anyone called it knowledge.